The Cartman drama triangle is a concept that was introduced by a psychiatrist named Stephen Cartman back in the 1960s. He used it to map out a type of destructive interaction that can come with conflict, a very common pattern that many of us get subconsciously looped into. With the Cartman drama triangle, we end up fitting into one of three roles: the victim, the rescuer, or the persecutor. And accordingly, we end up putting the other people that we're engaged in this conflict with into those other roles as well. So let me start with a personal example of how this can play out to get you thinking about it, and then we're going to take a broad and macro look at this. So I could name a lot of situations of this. It's a very common mentality when it comes to conflict. I have definitely watched myself float around the triangle in a number of different contexts, but the situation that I want to share with you now is one in which I was helping facilitate some group work for a group of people who were working together on a project. And we had had a previous meeting. I had taken notes during that meeting. I had created this very organized structure, sharing all of our discussion, different people's points. And I had created this document that I thought would be really helpful to share with the group. So I was already coming in as the rescuer. I was already coming in with this mentality of I've invented this thing. It's fantastic. It's gonna help everyone. You are all gonna love it. So I came into the group and shared my organized notes. Some people really did find it helpful. There was one person in the group in particular who did not find it helpful at all. This person was really bothered and honestly upset at me for having done that. I hadn't asked permission to take notes. I hadn't told them I was doing this. Because of cultural reasons, this person really wasn't comfortable having had what they had shared and contributed in the previous meeting. They weren't comfortable with having had that documented to begin with. And they also had a problem with the way that I had summarized what they had been expressing. They were reading something in what I had typed out in my notes that they felt like they hadn't said at all. And so they became very upset with me. And when they confronted me in this public meeting, they were upset. And so they came a little strongly, and I immediately flipped into victim. Honestly, I became very triggered. I sort of emotionally shut down, and I really did see them as this harsh, bad, mean person. Why are you coming at me? I was just trying to help. So this is how the drama triangle can play out. The roles aren't static. We don't just fit into one role and stay in there. We move around the triangle depending on what the conflict is bringing up. So in that situation, I came in feeling like I was a rescuer, and I left feeling like I was a victim and like this other person was the persecutor. I invite you to think about a conflict that you recently had. Think about a conflict with a loved one, maybe a spouse, maybe a parent, maybe a friend. The issue with the drama triangle is it prevents us from hearing one another. When we put these prescribed roles onto the different people who are playing out in a conflict, we end up not really understanding, we end up not trying to understand what they're seeking to express to us. This person who was angrily confronting me in the meeting, I honestly couldn't even hear the feedback because I was so upset about the way that they were engaging with me. Instead of being able to seek and understand and okay, what happened here? Can we talk about it? Can I better understand what has you so upset? It took me months afterwards to get an understanding of why this person had gotten so upset, because in that moment, I could only see them as the persecutor. So this is the challenge with the drama triangle. It cuts us off from humanity. It cuts us off from our own humanity because we put ourselves in these different roles. When I was the victim, I needed somebody else to have come in and saved me, and nobody did. I was facilitating the meeting. And so instead of stepping up and being able to self-advocate a little bit and facilitate that dialogue a little bit more, I had stuck myself in a victim mentality and I was unable to do anything. So we can dehumanize ourselves within these roles as well. Even by positioning myself as the rescuer coming into that space, I was not aware that different people might have different perceptions of this contribution that I was making. I was expected to be received as the rescuer and treated as such. And so in a way, I was dehumanizing myself by sticking myself in that role too, because I was not seeing the full range of possibility that could happen from that interaction. I was not looking from a broadened lens. I was looking from a very narrow lens from these roles. So see if you can think for yourself, what's a time that you got lost in either a victim mentality, a rescuer mentality, or maybe you were even in a persecutor mentality where you were pointing the blame at somebody else and saying that it was their fault, they needed to change, they were the only issue here. There's a lot of value in thinking about this triangle from a micro perspective, from an interpersonal perspective. And the point is, it blocks us from hearing one another. It puts us all in these prescribed roles, and we're not able to actually genuinely engage and understand one another as human. I would say I even switched over into persecutor a little bit after that meeting, because I was really thinking, like, why was this person so mean to me? I was just trying to help. Like, how could they do this? Which again blocked me from taking the time to actually unpack and understand the critiques and the opinions that they were bringing to the table. So see if you can find a similar situation where you can put yourself in all three of those roles and really understand how that can play out differently in any kind of conflict dynamic. Now let's zoom out and take a macro level look at this, because this plays out in the way that we see social justice issues, the way that we see oppression, the way that we learn about these concepts. And just like it can block us from hearing and seeing and understanding one another when we're trapped in the dynamic ourselves, we can also lose that same capacity to see with clarity, to see from a broader perspective, to see with humanity when we are seeing an external problem within the drama triangle. So if we're making this about an external issue, if we're making this about a macro level perspective, the victim, instead of being poor me, is like those poor people. Those poor, helpless people, they can't figure it out themselves. Look at all these terrible things that are happening to them. Somebody really needs to come save them. They can't save themselves. The rescuer, instead of being, I can help you, becomes those good guys. Look at those guys. They have the answers. Those people over there, they've solved it. They know what to do. They can save this situation. They have the right answers. Let's just turn to them. The persecutor, instead of it's all your fault, becomes those bad guys. They are the problem. They need to be eradicated. This wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for them. They're the ones to blame. It is all their fault. Now, yikes, like this is intense, right? We can probably immediately bring to mind a lot of situations where we have perceived the outside world, especially in the realm of politics, from this drama triangle lens. And this is so interconnected to the people that we feel allegiance to and the people that we feel separation from. So this is an invitation to think about, who are the others to you? Who are the people that you distance yourself from? Who are the people that you see as the bad guys? Those are probably the ones who are playing out this persecutor role in the way that you're thinking about the world, in the way that you're thinking about reality, in the way that you are intaking news, intaking content, intaking different videos and readings. Now, it's challenging to talk about this because there is a grain of truth. Like, there are atrocities happening in the world right now that we can categorically point to and say, like, hey, that is not okay. And when we put it in the frame of the drama triangle, we are very, very, very likely oversimplifying the problem. And the drama triangle is not about pointing blame, because the drama triangle recognizes that it's a relational experience that is playing out and that is happening. It doesn't mean there's no room for accountability. It doesn't mean that there's no room for pointing out injustice, but it does mean that we need to watch our mentalities. We need to watch our mindset. We need to watch the way that we are making up stories and then defining people or groups of people by the stories that we create, or that have been created for us by the broader society. Because the problem is, it dehumanizes everybody who's involved in this triangle. When we're seeing victims from a victim mentality, we are making assumptions that they don't have the tools to solve their own problems. We are making assumptions that there needs to be somebody else, some other outside force, to come and save them. We are inherently dehumanizing them by not recognizing them as capable, as valid, as equipped, as empowered. And they might not have the tools they need to enact change or enact action or stand up for themselves. We can recognize that without putting them into a victim role. There's another version of this triangle called the empowerment dynamic that has been used as a model for how we can think about these roles instead. So instead of victim, we can think about somebody as a creator. Given the right tools, given the right context, these are people who can create the solutions to their problems. They're not people who need to be swooped in and rescued. They're people who can be empowered to create their own solutions. Instead of seeing someone as a rescuer, we can see them instead, we can reframe that into a coach. These are people who want to help. These are people who are here to walk the walk with the people needing the help, but they're not there to do the saving. They are not there to rescue anyone. It's a shift away from fixing the situation. It's a shift away from telling people what needs to happen. And it's a shift into asking, what do you need in this situation? How can I be of support to you? Like, let's put social work in that role, for example, because social work, if we're thinking about a conflict drama triangle, social work would very often, especially if we are people who are studying social work, we would very often put social workers in a rescuer role. And that has inherently caused problems, right? Like, social work has a history of white supremacy, just like most other professions in this country. And so when we are coming into a situation thinking we know better than the victims, thinking we are there to save people, we're going to do the same thing that I did in that meeting, which is unintentionally step on cultural toes and do things that other people don't actually find supportive at all. So coming from a rescuer role is not really a helpful thing. Coming from a coaching role might be a better way to think about this. We can think about ourselves that way, and when we think about people that we believe are solving the problems of the world, let's see if we can think about them in a coaching role too. Not saviors, but people who are seeking to help. All right, now the tough one, the persecutor. We can reframe persecutor into challenger. And this requires a little extra emotional labor, but I want to encourage you to lean into it because it can help free us from the trap of this drama triangle. If we think about any kind of conflict, what's happening? It's usually, like, let's just think about it between two people. Between two people, any kind of conflict is very often a power play, and we can see that power play in one of two ways. We can see it as a situation where somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose, or we can see it in a situation where this person is seeking to be understood and this person is seeking to be understood, and they are both bringing something to the table. Now, if we think about this on an interpersonal level, it might be a little easier. Like, think back to a conflict you had with a loved one. In an interpersonal conflict, anytime two people are involved in that conflict, the vast majority of the time, what they want is for both parties to be understood. This person wants to be understood. This person wants to be understood. I'm going to make the controversial argument that the same is true on a macro level. I'm going to make the controversial assertion that the same is true in political realms too. And things have gotten twisted because politics has been structured to be a win or lose game. You either get elected and you win, or you don't get elected and you lose. Like, it's pretty clear that there is like a hierarchy of conflict that politics definitely sets up for. So it's understandable why that permeates so much. And we see this conflict, like we see, if we think about wars, if we think about genocide, like very clearly there's this, like, one person wants to win, the other person is trying not to let them win. Like, it's very clear that that's what's playing out. If we can envision a world where we weren't so trapped in this drama triangle, though, what both parties really want is understanding. So the shift for the challenger is looking at the intention. What is the intention of the challenger? Instead of automatically seeing them as somebody who's just putting people down and trying to win, can we see them? Is it possible for us to reframe in our own mind? Is it possible for us to just like work on, can we see them from a slightly more humanistic lens? Can we gain a basic understanding of, like, what's the intention? Instead of seeing them as somebody or a group of people who is putting people down, what are they seeking to build up? Very rarely in conflict does somebody just want to, like, crush somebody else just for crushing them's sake. Very often they want something. What is it that they're seeking to build up? Can we think about it from that lens instead? I'm not saying this is always easy. I'm not saying it's always fair to be asked to do this. I am saying that when we can think about conflict, when we can think about interpersonal dynamics, when we can think about social level conflict, macro level conflict, political polarization even, if we can think about it from an empowered lens, if we can think about it from this empowerment dynamic, instead of falling into the drama triangle, it opens up a whole new realm of possibility for resolving conflict. The reason we are entrenched in polarization, the reason why we end up having so much of, like, this kind of conflict, is because of the way we've been socialized to view conflict itself. And we can't solve that for the world. We can't change the way presidents are acting. We can't change the way different leaders of different countries are acting. We can't change politicians. We can't change, people who are playing out conflict in a broad level. We can change the way that we show up. We can change the way that we participate in it. So this is an invitation to release the drama. This is an invitation to at least see the drama for what it is, which is drama, and to understand that all conflict is going to have more nuance, is going to have more complexity than we can see on a surface with the drama triangle. All these different ways that we see people oppressed in society. My goal, my intention, my desire is for you to not get caught up in that drama triangle, to not be seduced by the easy way out of putting people into these boxes where there's a victim, where there's a savior, and where there's a persecutor. These are cultural conditions, these are socialized experiences, and our socialization affects the way that we see and the way that we show up. And if we desire to be part of the positive change, if we desire to live in a culture and a country that is less polarized, this is the work that must be done. We've got to take ourselves out of the triangle. We've got to take ourselves out of the drama. And we have to start figuring out how to engage in conflict in a way that connects instead of divides. We have to figure out how to engage in conflict in a way that allows us to humanize and see one another within this triangle instead of, writing people off as a surface level image of what they actually are. We have to figure out how to understand the complexity of conflict and how we can come together even when we find ourselves in different positions. This is part of creating the world we want to live in, and this is part of the challenge and the opportunity for you to practice this semester.